Hello, I'm Mercedes Stephenson, and this is the West Block, politics, perspectives, and players. Over the last 2 years, more than 2 million Venezuelans have fled their country as poverty and violence has overtaken the once oil-rich nation. Venezuela has reached a tipping point. It has the world's highest inflation rate, which, according to the International Monetary Fund, hit an astronomical 1 million% this year. Across the country, people are suffering, and the opposition is calling on President Nicolas Maduro to resign. With world leaders meeting in New York this week for the United Nations General Assembly, President Trump has challenged the international community to end the misery in Venezuela.
We ask the nations gathered here to join us in calling for the restoration of democracy in Venezuela. Today we are announcing additional sanctions against the repressive regime, targeting Maduro's inner circle and close advisors.
Joining me now from New York is Diego Arria, Venezuela's former ambassador to the United Nations and a former member of the Venezuelan Congress. Mr. Arria, we'll get to President Trump's comments in just a minute, but first, let's start with this. How bad is the situation in your home country?
Just to give you a glimpse of the tragic situation in Venezuela, almost 10% of our population is today running away from the regime that has persecuted them, that has starved them, that has left them without medicines and without security. That's only the outside image. Inside the country, children are dying because of medicine, because of food, insecurity. We have now about 500 political prisoners, 200 military officers in jail. Venezuela has morphed into a narco-tyranny. It's the only country, I believe, in the world that have gangs in charge of the regime.
Earlier, we heard from President Trump announcing further sanctions against President Maduro and his inner circle. Do you think sanctions are enough at this point?
No, they are not enough, but that is a good step. Actually, President Trump has been the strongest president of the United States endorsing our cause. And actually, he has said very important things, that all options are on the table regarding our increasing tragedy.
President Trump seemed to suggest yesterday at the United Nations that he may send in the military to restore democracy. Would you support that?
You know, when you see a country where 10% of the population have to leave, and when you see people starving, when 80% is in poverty, when you have a narco regime, you have to want to have any option. You want to have all the options on the table. And one is a military one. Venezuelans, by ourselves, will not be able to rescue our freedom, because this is a regime that is being supported by the armed forces. And at the same time, these armed forces are controlled by the Cuban regime. So you can imagine what a plight, what a situation we find ourselves.
I'd like to ask you about the attempted assassination on President Maduro involving a drone. This story has largely fallen off of the international media coverage, but what do you think happened?
It looks like something that, if you watch again the videos, the only ones who didn't move an inch when that happened was Maduro and the Minister of Defense. They both knew what was going to happen, so that they were not scared. But you know, this is the same thing as Fidel Castro. He denounced, I think, 100 attempts against his life. Chavez, about 50, and Maduro already has about 15 to 20 false announcement of attempts on his life.
So basically, did Maduro's people fake the assassination attempt just to justify a crackdown?
Absolutely. They have done it. Every time, they have got about 20 or 25 prisoners, and they find them in minutes. They don't take not even a day or 48 hours to find them. No, they find them immediately. So you have to think that it was very well organized.
Why do you think the international community has not done more to deal with the situation in Venezuela?
You know, it has taken, and it's taken a long time to understand, like I said at the beginning, that we don't have a government. We have a narco state controlled by gangs. All those people in charge have been indicted in the United States for either arms trafficking, drug trafficking, and they have been imposed sanctions on all of them. It has taken too long a time to actually understand the situation in Venezuela. I believe that changed after the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, Luis Almagro, presented to the international community 3 or 4 reports explaining to the world the magnitude of the Venezuelan tragedy and the potential danger, not only for Venezuela, but for the region. So that's why we're now about to see how these governments in Latin America will go before the International Criminal Court.
There's been a severe lack of food and tremendous challenges for people in Venezuela. What happens if there's no relief? What will the consequences be for the people?
Well, already the consequences are terrible. According to all the international statistics, like I was saying, people dying because there is no dialysis treatment, or the people who have cancer or chemotherapy, even children, undernourished, it's actually threatening our future.
Nearly 7 years ago, you filed charges in the International Criminal Court in The Hague against former Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez. The corruption, many argue, though, is continuing in Venezuela. Do you think that the people of Venezuela are ever going to see their current or former leaders held to account and to stand trial for what has happened in their country?
Well, I took Chavez to this case to the court in The Hague, but the Almighty took him away before the trial was even initiated. Now, the support that we have now of several countries, including, for example, Canada, which I believe is probably the most important one, because Canada has an international image of an honorable and independent foreign policy. So that the step taken today by Canada to add a signature to this denouncement of Maduro is, in my view, one of the most important events in the process of recovery of our freedom. It is not going to be easy. The international justice is too slow. It took 10 years to take Milosevic to trial. I was a witness against Milosevic, and I know if people in Venezuela cannot wait 10 years. That's what I believe, that President Trump is right when he's saying all the options are on the table.
Thanks so much, Mr. Arria, for joining us. That's all the time we have for today. I'm Mercedes Stephenson for The West Block.